Intent is great. All our policies have the best intent, but I think intent doesn't mean anything till the time you don't look at implementation.
Today, I have with me Madhukar, who is the co-founder and CEO of Leadership for Equity. Why do we need to work with the system? What is the role of a system and what's the role of an individual?
When you suddenly say system in education, everyone looks at the government, right? And that's the problem. A district in India has anywhere about 6,000 to 7,000 teachers. Any corporate with a 5,000 employees, the kind of CEO that you want, draw the same parallel to the district education officers we have. Now we have enough data, Pranav, to really show what is happening inside the classrooms. There are only two people that need to work in education, the teachers and people who support teachers. Everyone else should get out of the way.
Welcome to EI Dialogues.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Pranav.
Hello and welcome to EI Dialogues. My name is Pranav Kothari and I'm the CEO of Educational Initiatives. We see a world where children everywhere are learning with understanding, and we help achieve this by making student assessments and an adaptive learning software called MindSpark. We also do impact evaluation services for other organizations to measure the impact of their intervention as it relates to improving student learning in language, math, science, and other subjects. EI Dialogues is our endeavor to bring in-depth conversations with sector leaders who have started organizations, scaled organizations, made a tremendous impact, to uncover the how, the why, the when, the where, to learn their trades and tricks and secrets so that we can succeed in our mission as well. Today, I have with me Madhukar, who is the co-founder and CEO of Leadership for Equity. Madhukar has a very interesting trajectory where he started as a student in a government-aided school, went on to graduate at the top of his high school, be in the Andhra Pradesh board, studied at BITS Pilani, and decided to be part of the first cohort of the Teach for India Fellowship. As a teacher in a government school, he saw that even when good policies exist, the implementation of that requires a lot of work, a lot of tinkering. He has spent a lot of time on the field, going deep in one state, in one city, in one district, in Maharashtra, to be able to understand how systems function, and has built an entire organization now that's very successful in improving systems by working with the middle layers of the government that tend to be in those positions where they make a difference. In this episode, I'm very curious to ask Madhukar, what is a system? Why bother working with a system? What are these people that he works with? How large are their operational things? Why has he chosen to sort of stay at this for so long? I'm also interested in knowing that, do we need to work with all the teachers in the system, or are there ways to prioritize the ones who are more motivated? Ultimately, how does Madhukar measure something, the impact of his work on a system? Because at least I have the easier job of measuring learning improvement at the student level. But when you are responsible for improving a state that might have up to 1 crore students and 10 lakh teachers, how does Madhukar know whether he's on the right track or not? Overall, Madhukar has sort of demonstrated that after getting access to a great education, he has sort of playing a catalytic role in improving the education for others, and I'd love to unpack that a little more. Thank you so much, Madhukar, for joining us. I'm very interested in our conversation. Welcome to EI Dialogues.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Pranav.
Madhukar, we asked you to bring an object from your life that's personally meaningful to you. Were you able to get something?
I did, and it's not a physical, so it's a soft copy. So you need to indulge me in this. So this is a photograph of me way back in 2009, a much younger self of me, and that's they keep saying that teachers shouldn't have favorites, but that's Kunal.
Okay.
And he was one of the 35 students that I started my journey as a teacher in a government school as a part of the first cohort of Teach for India. And Kunal was one of those children, highly inquisitive, definitely naughty in the classroom, but I think he definitely represented what India's millions of children who go into government schools mean. And the reason why I showed you this picture is also for me, and what keeps me going and what inspires me is the full circle stories. So Kunal is once a story for me. I taught Kunal grade 3 and grade 4 back in 2009 and 10. Kunal was, obviously finished his schooling, inspired by a few of us who were in the school to complete his Teach for India, finished his graduation, was a part of the 2022 Teach for India cohort.
Oh, wow.
So he became a fellow. And then after his fellowship, he joined LFE as a team member, leading one of our initiatives with
Nice.
teachers. So for me, it was one of those sort of full circle moments that really sort of stayed back in my last 15 years of journey. And honestly, I think these are the reasons why I continue to be in the sector. So yeah, I think that's my memory and a short something I wanted to show you.
And that must feel very satisfying. But tell us more, what led you down this path? What was your education like? How did you grow up?
So I was born and brought up in a farming family. So my grandfather was a farmer, and he had 8 children, and my father was the second of the 8 children. And so growing up, I still vividly remember my early first 7-8 years of my life. I remember just running behind my grandfather into the fields of paddy and rice in the southern part of India in Hyderabad, near Hyderabad. And so definitely get that sort of inspiration of being in a much more community-driven, like a large family, a farming community kind of a setup. And the first couple of years, I don't even think I did any of my early childhood so-called kindergarten thing, because it was hard to access Anganwadis back then. So I think, but I do remember that there was a government-aided school nearby. So my first and second grade, I was in the village, started off in a government-aided school. And the key sort of pivotal moment in my life came in when my father decided to move from the rural farming setup into an urban for a better economic opportunity. And so what that led is also my movement from that government-aided school in a rural setting to a better school in an urban Hyderabad. And that sort of changed my entire life path, right? So ended up in third grade, I took admission in a better school, and then from there sort of went on to finish my education in 10th and 12th grade. Was definitely a studious person throughout my early years. So one thing that happened because of that was I happened to top the Andhra board, the erstwhile Andhra 12th board. So I was one of the state toppers. That sort of led me to get into BITS Pilani, one of the premier institutes, finish my engineering there. So I think moving from like a cushion and a cocoon kind of a family setup, leaving everything and then going and owning my own education journey in Pilani was definitely the second key sort of moment in my life. It was to pursue better opportunity, better education. And then after that, finished my engineering for 4 years. And if you're in engineering in India, you know what they say. I think you're one among the millions. But I think what those 4 years taught me was who I was not. And I think it's important to also realize that what were my strengths and what were my areas that I was good at. And so instead of taking a more technical kind of a job post my engineering, I ended up in a sales and marketing role here in Mumbai in Larsen & Toubro. So where I was actually selling switchgear, for the company. Very interesting role. And I think definitely learned a lot about being in professionalism. How do you work in professional settings? How do you work in large company settings? After that, I was again, very distinctly remember, I was in my those cubicles that you have in corporate setups and reading the Times of India newspaper. And there was this huge ad that said, "Are you ready for a challenge?" That was the first year in 2008-9 when the Teach for India Fellowship was starting off. And little did I know that, it was going to play a big part in my life. But ended up applying thinking that I'm just going to do this 2-year stint and maybe get back to corporate. But well, it's been 15 years. I'm still in the education space. But I think so I quit my corporate job, very comfortable corporate job, and then became a teacher in a government school in Pune, which was the third sort of pivotal moment in my life, which basically
Where you met Kunal.
Where I met Kunal, yes, where I met Kunal. And it was also, and now in hindsight, now I think like why that decision was made, because for me, it was just that excitement to do something different at that, like when you're a young 21-year-old trying to do something. But then it was also the time, that phase of 2007-8, if you remember, Pranav, was also the time when there was a lot of fellowships were beginning, right? Like you had Gandhi Fellowship kicking off. The Indicor was another one in Ahmedabad that really resonated. So a lot of the fellowships and social sector in itself being a stream of work that young professionals can go into. Now in hindsight, I can connect the dots back to say that maybe that influenced me to take that role. So yeah, long story short, I quit my corporate job to become a fellow in a municipal school. Yeah, that's how my entry into education started. But I think now I look back and I think these three pivotal moments of me moving from a rural government school setup to like a urban private school to get better, better learning, getting into Pilani for better engineering degree, and me sense of giving back, and then joining the Teach for India in the first cohort in 2009 were perhaps those moments that really shaped the way I looked at education and the life.
So Madhukar, how did your experience as a TFI fellow, how were those 2 years, and what did you do next after that?
Yeah, I think those definitely those 2 years as a teacher inside a classroom were irrevocable, right? In terms of experience, definitely a life-changing experience. Because I think it was also the year, Pranav, in 2009 when the right to education came in. So I became a teacher inside a government schools when the right to education was adopted as an act, and it started implementing. So I think once you have a lived reality of being a teacher inside a classroom, trying to undergo the different processes a school happens, work with children, work with the different systems and structures in school, and how at a macro level, the kind of act and how it is being implemented inside the school. You see the glaring differences and the gaps that it brings in. And being a teacher, working with the other teachers inside the school, of course, we were a part of a fellowship program, but I think once you start interacting with the government teachers and why they do the work in a certain way and how are we sort of you start comparing, right? Like you start comparing yourself with the government teacher next door. One way to do is you can feel good about yourself, but also to start empathizing with why are they in a situation, why are they not able to deliver at a level that I'm not. And that's when I think really looked at how the system often operates for our teachers, right, in the country. And when you have that lived reality of being a teacher in the classroom, it just sets a lot more groundedness into understanding our schools better, understanding really what goes on inside our classrooms with our children, and why certain macro indicators of learning, why certain success factors of how we look at India's education, we are not able to achieve. So that really sort of provided the grounding for me in those initial years.
And what is the system that everybody talks about?
Right.
I've never been able to touch it, feel it, see it.
Yeah.
I've just heard there are systemic forces and there are systems that take over the individual. Very system hai kya?
Heck yeah. No, good question. And I think like oftentimes we, the myth is when you suddenly say system in education, everyone looks at the government, right? And that's the problem, because the system is everywhere. A family is a system, a school is a system, a community. And so is the entire education department if you look at it as a system.
Right.
I think the whole notion of approaching education with a systems lens, and this is where I think the jargon has, deeply penetrated itself into the education sector of India, is to start looking at the problem in its whole. And, and this is where I think a lot of my learning came in, because if you look at a teacher and a child inside a classroom in a government setup, it's not linear. It's not just like those two people are, inside and then like nothing else exists. There are multiple micro, macro forces that are acting, right? For example, a headmaster and how the headmaster treats the teacher and the children, how the local corporator or the elected representative tries to look at the school and what are the things he or she is bringing in. Then you have suddenly a change in curricular reform and textbooks and what that does to a teacher. And suddenly you have NGOs like us who are trying to do something inside a school system. All of these effects in the way a teacher-child interaction and student-teacher interactions happens inside a school system. So if we are able and if we really want to look at the problem of education in India, unless we are able to look at this in a much more holistic way, it's hard to sustain any kind of innovation that we are doing inside a classroom. And that's what I think a good, 10 years of our work, at least me and my co-founder when we started Leadership for Equity, that's what we did. We took 10 years of grounding in an understanding of really what happens inside schools before even we set up LFE, right? Because I feel that's important. The minute you ground yourself in the realities of teachers, schools, it gives you a very different perspective. I think till the time we don't understand the people who make that schools, who make these government systems, it's hard to change it. Because I think the intention of young people getting in policy is to change the status quo. And I believe is you need to empathize with the status quo before even you try and change it, right?
Yeah,
so
that's it does, I think it allows us to stay for the long haul. So I remember that my first foray into this, I spent half of the first 3 years, walking around Delhi slums, opening up a Mindspark center in the basement, knocking on parents' doors to ask for 50 rupees a month. And the impact that I saw during those 3 years has sort of allowed me to do this for the next, decade.
Absolutely.
And so in addition to obviously having a much better grip on the reality, I think just at a personal level, if one wants to stay in for the long haul, make a career, I think these groundings are very valuable.
And I've often said, any individual who wants to get into the sector needs to give those 3 decades, right? A decade of grounding, a decade of really building your greatness, and a decade of really amplifying that in the sector. And that's the 3 decade sort of a path I often say anyone signing up now for any fellowships, you should say, think of it like you need to give 30 years of life for that.
You must be a tough teacher, taskmaster, because you've said the minimum is 30 years of labor of love, even if it is. But that sounds daunting, Madhukar. Can we not do something there must be a faster way, right? There must be a shortcut. Can India even afford 30 years of doing this? Don't we need to do this tomorrow?
We need to, and I think that's also one of the problems of solving some of these very deep-rooted decades. It's been coming for years and years, right? With urgency. So how do you balance out urgency with really what needs to be done? I think now I've spent half of those 30 years, right, in the sector. So I'm 15 years young that way and not old, but come to a realization that some of these things take time. And you yourself know about the learning improvements that we try to make with children, even moving a classroom from a bad to good. And the thumb rule is it takes anywhere between 9 to 18 months. Turning around a school, even with all the global frameworks and research we have, takes anywhere between a good 2 to 5 years. And now we're talking about a system which is either a district level or a municipal body level, or even a smaller states that we work with, takes anywhere between a good 7 to 15 years, right? And that's the kind of investment we need. And what that also is hard, as you rightly said, it's not easy if you tell a young person, to say that, oh, you're going to see success after 15 years. It's going to be hard for them to sustain their own energy and motivation.
Well, Madhukar, you were a teacher for 2 years, right? Yeah. Under your leadership fellowship, students must have gained outstanding results. Correct. And we've seen many other experiments where it's able to take a poor to fair, fair to good in about 2-3 years. So when that can happen, why do we need to work with the system? Isn't it all about human agency? Isn't it all about motivated individuals who are well-trained? And the moment you deploy them, you can see change happening quickly? What is the role of a system and what's the role of an individual?
Yeah, no, great question, Pranav. And this is where I think the 10 years of us understanding of the grounding, spending time with a lot of schools and teachers really helped. Because what we saw across different geographies, and we continue to see our great schools, we see great teachers, We see like children coming out of these schools trying to, becoming, doctors, especially from really underserved communities. So we're seeing like bits and pockets of excellence everywhere across the country. And there's no doubt about it, right? Like especially the path you choose to run a school or go in deep and work with a few set of children and make it happen for them, which is fantastic. But I think like it's important for us to realize, for a country as big as India, how are we really defining the problem of education? And from the lens that we are seeing it is this problem of universalization, right? Like, have we been able to create great literacy, numeracy models for impact? Absolutely, yes. Have we used really good technology-based solutions? You yourself, MindSpark is a great example, to be able to prove learning outcome improvement? Absolutely, yes, right? Have we seen great schools and great headmasters, great teachers? Absolutely, yes. But I think the problem, and if you look at the global sustainable goals to really where nation is headed, have we been able to do it for the mass, the 100% of the children? That no. So for me, I think we are looking at the problem from a universalization standpoint, and we've been able to achieve this in the health. If you look at, say, a polio scheme or any other, even during COVID, the kind of vaccinations we were able to do, then why not education? Like, why can't we universalize? Of course, the minimum benchmarks and what it means, and now with Nipun Bharat and all of that is being clearly laid out. But I think that's the way we are looking at the problem, and hence the problem needs to be looked at from a whole system standpoint.
So you're saying in the same country, in the same Bharat, with the same levels of corruption or the competence level of politicians, or let's say all the system restraints in place, India has managed to achieve success in building toll roads and a fabulous highway system. It's managed to sort of deliver 1 billion vaccines in record time. Yeah. So it's not like at the country or at the people level, we can't make it happen. Then why is education levels and education outcomes in India not improved a single bit in 20 years? What explains this dichotomy?
Yeah, and you're right. And then I think, see, as a country, we haven't done badly at all. Like, if you look at our 70, 80 years journey post-independence, we have done exceptionally well with the enrollment in schools, right? Like, where it was 40, 50%, maybe 1960s, so now saying 90, 95% enrollment. We've brought kids into the schools. We've opened schools in 1 kilometer. So all of that is great. But now that we've brought kids into the schools, what do we do? Like, how do we ensure that they're getting excellent levels of learning, which is comparable not just globally, but also nationally, so that they have a fundamentally different life path? And you're right that macro indicators of learning have struggled. It's not like the government systems are not able to deliver. We have examples of JNVs, some of the other states. KVs are a great example, like where we've had excellent education being delivered in this. There is something that happens the minute it comes into a state and a district level, right? And I feel it's a combination of 2 or 3 issues that are at play here. One is the ability, if you look at it roughly, I think we have about 140, 150 million children going into government schools, and there are 800 plus local and state governments that are responsible to deliver quality. I think the ability of the individuals, one at a people level, to be able to sort of do this in a very structured way, support teachers, make sure your teachers are thriving, and create that environment for teachers to play their role, I think is very limited. I think that is something that it seems to be a big problem. And I think it directly correlates to the capacity gap of the individuals in the governments to do that. Second seems to be also policy gap, right? Intent is great. All our policies have the best intent, but I think, the saying is intent doesn't mean anything till the time you don't look at implementation. So I think how do you convert this really well-intentioned policies, including like your recently national education policy, to make it a reality? Seems to be the will to be able to convert that is missing. Right? And that comes in of how do you adapt, how do you contextualize some of these policies at a national level to a state, and then state to districts, and then clusters, and so on. So I think there's a policy gap around that, there's an intent, there's a capacity gap. So we see, and these are very, very glaring, right? Like when you interact with policymakers on the top, it's much easier, we are also comfortable and we are able to sort of converse. But I think the ability to do that at district level is where I feel we are failing, right? To draw parallels, a district in India has anywhere about 1,500 to 2,000 schools. That's about like a 6,000 to 7,000 teachers. Now you draw a parallel to any corporate kind of setup. any corporate with a 5,000 employees, the kind of CEO that you want, draw the same parallel to the district education officers we have. So I feel like the indifference that the state has put on the middle managers in a system is what has been the biggest gap of why we are not able to achieve learning sustainably. I think there have been spikes also, right? Like we're seeing ASR data is telling us there have been some immediate spikes in certain years where we've seen good interventions, good, even the recent one. Post, I think, COVID, the kind of national and solid movement on Nipun Bharat went in. We're seeing a big spike nationally on learning levels at an FLN level. But the real question for us at this juncture in 2025 is, can we sustain that for a longer run? And I think that is a problem. Until the time the state capacity and the states don't invest in the capacity of these district and cluster officers, because, I mean, but not to be provocative here, but I think if you look at the IAS cadre in the country, they go to the best schools in the world to have their capacity building and to constantly brush themselves with new skills. What is happening with our district officers? What is happening with our diets? Nothing. So I feel it's not the missing middle. Middle exists. But I think the ability to deliver and our investment in that, it has become a middle that is indifferent. It's become an indifferent middle, rather than a missing middle.
So in your opinion, what should we do? Like, what should teachers do? What should the middle do? What should the system do? Like, in a perfect world, what are the responsibilities of each?
And this is, honestly, this is a question and the quest that we as an organization have been over the last 7-8 years now. We said in any reform process, and going back to, I think, I'm quoting Karthik Muralidharan, of course, and he says that the two binding constraints for education in India seems to be pedagogy and governance, right? And I think if you look at both, there is something that is happening inside the classroom, which is where I think the pedagogy and all of these aspects, there's something that is outside the classroom. I think both need to be fixed, and across these both, for this to happen, at the heart of any of this reform process seems to be the teacher. I don't think any intervention, and we all agree on that. That's a common thing, let it be a technology-based intervention or a direct, capacity building intervention. Without the teachers, I really don't think we are able to solve this problem. So if you keep teachers at the heart of it, of any reform process, we are saying that there are 3 key things for us to achieve results sustainably. I think that is a key for me. One is, how do you ensure that the teachers inside the classrooms have really high quality resources and training support, right? Like many schools, many teachers are expected to deliver certain outcomes, but not having the resources within the vicinity inside the classroom or the school to be able to deliver those outcomes. And I think if we are able to provide them in a hand's distance among teachers, let it be your teaching learning material, let it be access to lesson plans, guidebooks, or whatever the teachers need for them to deliver that quality instructions, are we making sure that that happens for our teachers? The second, and I think this is perhaps the most critical, and the whole point around middle management I was trying to make, is the middle management exists to support teachers, right? There's also a famous saying of in education is there are only 2 people that need to work in education: the teachers and people who support teachers. Everyone else should get out of the way. And it is true for India as well. We need to make sure that the so-called middle management, let it be right from your CRCs, the cluster officers, to your diets, your SCRTs, everyone is working to make sure your teachers are thriving. So what that looks like is that our teachers being constantly supported inside the classrooms. Are they observed? Are they given feedback? Are they coached? Are they pointed towards the right set of resources for them to play out? That is the biggest missing element, and it plays out in our organizations, right? I mean, we both run organizations. Without good support, we are facing good attrition numbers, right? Like, people quit because of the managers. Unfortunately, government teachers cannot quit because of the managers, but they live a life of compliance, right? Like, I'm here as a teacher, so I'm going to live. So how do you sort of do that is the second piece of it. And the third piece of it is, again, bringing in a lot more of research and data-based decision-making for the teachers, right? Like, and this is to sustain. Like, great, your teachers are able to show good results, but ensuring that all of this sustains for longer periods of time, right? Like, achieving those ASR results in 23-25 is not enough. Can we show these results with maybe a 15-20% improvement or whatever improvement till 2030? If we are able to do that, then our collective efforts as non-profit education ecosystem, I think we would have said, as even as governments, because they are playing a critical role and teachers are delivering. So those policies, those data-driven processes, research-backed structures, how do you make sure that that is available for teachers to thrive? So we feel it's a combination of these three that might potentially lead for systems to change.
Madhukar, why bother working with the government, right? It seems like when you're trying to do things at that scale, it's not even clear to me how would you measure success? Would it even move the needle? So why work with the government? And if you choose to do, how would you measure success with them?
Great question, Pranav. And I think as someone who's worked with both the government school systems as a teacher and also in the private school system, I did have a stint of working with the private school ecosystem in Hyderabad. So I've seen like the both ends of the spectrum. And when we started off LFE, for us it became not a scale issue of why we want to work with the government, but it was more of a moral issue. And where it stemmed from is that, at least at a deep-rooted belief, at least me and Siddesh, who's a co-founder of LFE, we've always believed that education is a public good. It's a fundamental right of every child. And to bother about every child and the last child is the responsibility of the government, because they are the gatekeepers of equity in a way in the country or in a society. And the ability of the governments to make sure that a fundamental right like right to education is given. So it became more of a rights and an equity issue for us. It also is a moral issue for us, because if you look at the way education spending happens in India, a good 95 to 98% of the spending is public. Government spends so much money. Philanthropic capital, a lot of the other support is maybe meagerly 3 to 5%. And as a society, if we are not able to ensure that that 95% of public money is spent effectively, it became a big moral issue, right? For us, we need to make sure that every penny, and it's our money, it's a public money that we're going. And the third is from what my good friends Tarun and Kuldeep say is active citizenship, right? Like one way to look at governments and say, look, they're not able to deliver quality education. You can either sit, do nothing, and someday kabhi na kabhi to badlega, or you ignore, or the other way to do it is, you know what, it's our system, we're going to step up and do something about it. And that's the path we've chosen. And I think the path we've chosen is to say that rather than going in deep, because I've also been a teacher, so I know what effort and meaning it takes to teach a class of 30, 35 and be very content with it. There is absolutely nothing wrong. Like, we need teachers to feel that I can change the life of my 30, 35 kids who I'm directly in touch with. But I think when you extrapolate it, the denominator in India is 240 million. And for us to move any needle for that number, we need to build the ability of these governments to deliver. Yes. So for us, it became that issue to say that if you can pick like one or two of those well-intended policy things, ensuring kids are learning FLN well, making sure that the 6th to 10th graders have certain future literacy skills, which is now defined as a new thing coming up. So just those two indicators, if you put at it and do it for the masses, to universalize what it means for India's children, irrespective of the background that they come from. That for us became the true reason why we said, let's bet on the governments to deliver quality education.
And what needle would you move on? Like, what would it show? Like, how would you measure that?
That's a hard. If you'd asked me this question 5 years back, honestly, we would have struggled, because I think the big problem of any organizations working at scale, working with the governments, is to show that progress. And quickly. And that's the big thing, because I think the big problem for organizations like ours is also the delayed gratification, right? And especially with more young people coming in, we cannot possibly tell them, wait for another 10 years to see the results. They'll be like, boss, I came for a 2-year stint, so I need my results quickly. To really sort of define those short wins also. So I think we are now at a point where we have defined those, when you look at any school system, either at a district level or a state level, we have very clearly defined around 20 to 25 indicators that show that we are on the right path or not. And those indicators are a combinations of how the teachers are doing, how the classrooms are doing, call them intermediary outcomes or like long-term outputs. but I think we've been able to map them over the course of the last 8-10 years of our work that give you those intermediary results and successes, because we need them, and without that it's going to be hard to mobilize a team, because in our work, Pranav, this purpose in itself is just not enough, right? Like you need much clearer goals, targets, and things to achieve for us to mobilize a larger collective or larger teams to move forward. So I think so for us, the end outcome is very clear, and I think I oftentimes working with the system, the other common thing that comes up is that, especially, and I'm sure you must have felt it. Arts is important. Drama is important. Sports is important. Absolutely, empathy is important. Everything is values are important. There's no denying that. But I think this metaphor is having your eye on the 8 ball. When you play pool, you need to make sure that all the balls go in the right pockets, but the 8 ball, which is a black ball, needs to go in the end. So no matter where you're playing, you constantly need to have eye on the 8 ball. I think the eye on the 8 ball for the work that we are doing is learning outcomes. We just cannot not do it. I think that has to be sacrosanct, no matter whatever balls you play on the pool table in the system. You just, for the children that we are serving, for the communities we are serving, we have to make sure that they are excelling in the kind of learning and the exposure that we are providing. So that for us is 8 ball. And even for us as an organization over the years, we said, look, there are a lot of things you can play, but till the time you don't, at least for the primary school readiness plus the grade 5 stage, we said foundational learning is very critical. For grades 6 to 10, we said, like, now what we're calling as future literacy, which is a new thing that LFE is now venturing into, is very critical. Like, what are the other aspects of learning in terms of their own personalities, skills that the kids get exposed to, so that they move beyond the 10th grade and 12th grade for them to become entrepreneurial, right? So that, I think, for us is the end impact, and that's the way we are looking at it.
Nice. Madhukar, when we started working on assessment reform for states or even deploying MindSpark in states, our thought process was, let's run pilots in multiple states, because with the vagaries of chief minister elections, political party, IS officers, there's just so much flux working with one state that you want to work with 3, 5, 10 in the hope that one of them sort of sticks.
Correct.
I was so amazed to find that you chose to work with just one state for the first 10 years of LFE. Why? Why put all eggs in one basket?
Yeah. So, no, I think it stems from this fact, Pranav, I think, which we touched upon earlier, is to really, it takes time to empathize with the status quo. And that there is no other alternative, right? Like, you might fast track the learning, but I think you can't fast track empathy and understanding of people. That takes time. And it takes time not just to earn the trust of the people inside any system that you're working with, but it also builds your credibility. Because I think, like, if people, and the reason why I compare, the new age contemporary kind of non-profits to how the governments operate is, a government employee knows that I'm going to be here till the time I'm going to retire, I'm going to take my pension and get out at 60 or 58, whatever that is. But a non-profit, like, you are truly a credible leader when you are showing up 5 years, 10 years down the line. That's what I think builds the trust, because I think we still have people whom I started working way back in 2009-10. The reason why they keep calling back LFE or the leadership team is because they know that, they've been there for 15 years. So how do you mirror that? And that's what trust is all about, right? And that's the same goes with us also. Like, you have a leader or an IS officer who's been in 5-7 years in education, being a secretary. Like, we know that they understand the game, they are credible, they know that these are the people that bring about change, and we bet on them. That's the same bet you want people to make on you, and that takes time, right? So as you said, I think we place bet on that one state to really understand for ourselves that what goes on. And in fact, in the first 4 years of LFE's existence, we were just there in one municipal body in Pune. That's where our work started. It was a 180-200 school system, and it continues to be. And we just stayed there, put our heads down, worked with the 200 school system to understand the dynamics of everything. And that potentially, when we had to expand, and now we are almost in 7-8 districts in Maharashtra and 2-3 municipal bodies. And now for us, the amount of time it takes to plug and play the learnings is shortened. right? But it took us those 4-5 years of really grounding ourselves to understand. And the same with, like, we have been in Maharashtra for almost 10 years. We have seen almost 5 ministers, 4-5 secretaries, 10 SCRT directors for us to really understand how do we, if we have to potentially expand into one other state, how do we do that? And each state in India is big.
So wouldn't you be intimidated by the fact that you have this revolving set of people, like all the equity that you built up gets vanished? Like, why still stick around and just do one state day in and day out? And forget a state, you're saying one municipal body, one district. That sounds like very small in the grand scheme of things.
I agree. And I think honestly, the first 4-5 years for us was just learning. And what we realized was exactly this, right? Even if you are in one state, the top people keep changing. Like, obviously your governments change, your IS cadres change, and your key officers change. But the people under them, you go a level, 2 levels below under them, they remain in the system. They are committed to the system, right? Including the teachers. They are not going to, maximum, they're going to shift a district or a block, but they are there. They are right there. Your IS, your secretaries keep changing. And what we've realized was, till the time you have these very strong leaders and the middle managers and then the people below backing you and the work, and you build credibility and trust, then it's hard to get out. Because our inspiration as an organization came from these people and our understanding. We have seen rural tribal pockets from Chandrapur to Aurangabad and Pune. And some of these teachers just keep your work going, and it was hard to let go of, saying that if you let go of this wealth of knowledge and understanding of what teachers can achieve, if you give them the right platform, that really gave us the grounding. And hence, for us, it was critical for us to stay longer, to build that credibility. And now, based on that, it's easy now for us to take on one more state to say, look, we've been here for 10 years. Now, if you're taking an Andhra, where we now gradually move to, it is easier because we now know, like, what does it take to build that relationship with the second, third layer inside the system.
Madhukar, when I'm thinking about a system, like a state typically would be 30 lakh students, 1 lakh teachers. It sounds so big, right? Is there a strategy to stratify some of this? Like, how do you approach this? Do you segment a large group of teachers into different buckets basis some characteristics, and do you work differently with all of them? What's your hack on working with a very large system?
Yeah. So I think as we were discussing how teachers are the key part or the heart of any reform process, and we learned it the hard way, like how to work with teachers in a way that is encompassing of what they feel and how they are. I still remember how teacher trainings are a thing inside governments. And I remember I was addressing a group of 100 teachers in a municipal setup, and one of the teachers loudly said, Puna ala prashikshan. This is the saying of teachers. Basically, in Marathi, it means, here comes training once again. So we are working in a system where people feel that just training and overtraining teachers is the only way to, change learning outcomes, which I think we've learned it the hard way, right? Like, we've had pushbacks with unions. I remember we had a letter of, get LFE out. We don't need any more trainings. This is not what we want. So I think it took us all of these hard learnings to balance out the need and demand. And I think that's where a lot of our work currently is, right? Like, there is no point pushing down the teacher's throat saying that you need to undergo this training. Rather than that, I think moving into a place where let the teachers own what they want to learn. I think as a system, now we are at a place as ecosystem, as governments, I think now there is enough content, enough material for us to offer demand-based, a need-based kind of a ecosystem for teachers to choose from. And that's where I think even their own agency will come into play, right? So I think many of our programs now are all demand-led. So one of the first things we do is we do something called as a teacher need analysis. I mean, Andhra example, of course, you're one of the key partners there. And one of the things that we have always emphasized is that without teacher need analysis, there's no point in training teachers. So now I think we have done that every year. Like once you keep doing teacher need analysis with and there are 1.5 lakh teachers there, about 100,000 teachers fill this survey and they tell us what they need. So the SCR, we work along with the SCRTs and diets to make sure that we're creating that content, which is specific only for those 30,000 teachers who need English pedagogy, those 40,000 who need science, only those who need, social studies. So then that becomes a much more sort of a demand. So even in one of the projects we're doing on, 21st century skills and on coding and computer science, it's completely demand-led. We, with the support of the district administration diets, we roll out sort of a survey or a Google link saying that this is the program, this is what we're doing. Only those teachers who feel that this is they need for their own learning and they'd like to opt in, only they come in. And this has led to fantastic results, because even for the team and everyone to be motivated enough to work with teachers who want to seek this learning.
Want to soak it in.
Absolutely, and it's important. And I think what we have also learned is the data. And I think this is again going back to Andhra example. Now we have enough data, Pranav, to really show what is happening inside the classrooms, right? I think a lot of the work of pedagogy, I'm talking about general pedagogical skills, whether there's enough checks for understanding, how is the facilitation skills of teachers, how are the children sitting in groups. Now we often talk about the content knowledge that the teachers have or do not have, but I think the general pedagogical skills are also very, very critical. And we have, from I think 3-4 states, like we've been able to do the standardized classroom observation tool in Andhra, Maharashtra and Haryana, are now scaling up in Nagaland, and we have enough data to now see what is happening, right? So when you look at a teacher, a general pedagogical skills perspective, demand-led teacher need analysis. And the third critical piece is where what you guys do at EI is the learning data from the children. If you are able to triangulate these 3 data sets and create content on top and leverage potentially sort of AI to, make sure every teacher automatic needs comes in. Like this is what your children are learning, this is where your pedagogical skills are, this is what you have demanded. There's nothing like it I think we would have solved. But I'd love to tag you on the whole assessments piece and AI, and where do you see, because I know you've been working extensively in this area.
So Madhukar, I resonate with a lot of what you said, right? Especially we say, why should all teachers attend the same training session? It should be personalized, customized, just like how our music tastes are. Yeah. In fact, why should even students have all the same textbook? Yes. It should be personalized and customized. But I do think when you have my classroom's data along with my self needs and sort of something, even my motivation to take up that training would go up, yeah. Right? And I think we can now accomplish a lot of this basis, both the presence of smartphones, we still have to do some work on decreasing the stakes of taking assessments. Normally, the moment you want to do a teacher needs assessment, people get into a fear mode and try to game the system. And we need to sort of talk about that it's not about where you are, but it's just about sort of how you get better from there. But I see a lot of possibilities of, marrying student assessment data with teacher needs analysis to create bespoke programs. And AI can maybe just do this faster, do this more, in ways that's not just taking into account quantitative factors, but also preferences, interest areas, hobbies, to be able to put this all together. So that's some work that we've embarked on along with you in Andhra, but starting something in Jharkhand, and as more and more appetite goes up. Because I think what we've achieved through technology is the fact that not everything has to be concurrent in the same place at the same time, right? We can do this a lot more asynchronously, as and when the teacher shows up, wants to show up, wants to do more. And similar to you, resonate with letting this be raising your hand. So for example, in Tamil Nadu, when we were putting an assessment cell together, we sent out a circular saying, we're going to embark on this assessments training. You will not get more pay. You will not get to move to the city. Yeah. Here are 5 reasons why this is just extra work without recognition. And we still got 300 applications, 150 were qualified. Ultimately, the batch started with 50 of them. But they were then, had all the raw material ingredients to be able to work with them.
Correct.
So I feel any form of demand-led sort of intervention tends to be more satisfying, tends to have a higher ROI than a supply-led intervention. Once someone asked me, what's a good education system, according to me? And I said, a good education system is where it provides an equitable access to opportunities. I think there will be a bell curve coming in grade 1. There will be a bell curve coming out at grade 12. But today, the plot of parental income and educational achievement is highly correlated. Right? And I think a good education system neutralizes this. That your education and your access to opportunity is independent of your parental income. And to me, that's how I interpret equitable outcomes. Right? It's not like everybody will have the same learning level, but it's just that everybody will have the same access to quality education and then opportunities, because talent is evenly distributed, but opportunities are not. And a good system sort of tends to marry that. But what's your definition of a good education system?
I mean, resonating with like what your thoughts is, right? For me, I've always looked at a good education. One, from a access standpoint, it has to be equitable, right? Like what we've been able to do with great transportation systems in the best urban cities of India, like what a metro did for Delhi. I think if you're able to do that for education, what does that mean for a rich and poor to be in the same schooling system where they have access to good opportunities? That's for me in the essence of it. But even from an outcome standpoint, I think we're moving beyond just like numbers. And I think this is, of course, we know we are now in a society where numbers mean everything. 10th grade, kitna aaya, 12वीं kitna aaya, kitne percentage pass hua. I still feel like we are behind that. I know you guys have been doing a lot of experiments on really defining success, but for me, an equitable society we're still far behind it. But I think if we are able to have a common understanding of what success means for the children of this country and build that understanding among the rich, poor, among the different castes, different religions, among the government and the non-government, if you're able to have that common charter of really where our children want to go in this country, that for me, I think we would have led to a good, equitable education.
See, the obsession with marks and maximizing marks on school-leaving exams like 10th or 12th or high-stakes exams is a global phenomenon. So even if you look at the top 5 PISA countries like Japan, South Korea, Singapore, people are obsessed with marks there also, right? So that, I think, is an innate human behavior that you can't change, because your marks on that test determine what college you get into, that determines your first job, and so on and so forth. Now, the one difference between the top 5 PISA countries and the bottom where India is what types of questions get asked, right? So in our board exams, there's a tremendous emphasis on facts, figures, procedures from the textbook. Now, the genesis of this is that the question makers, the board setters thought that to actually provide equitable access to everyone to get, everything must come from the textbook, right? In which case then people who don't have access to an encyclopedia or the internet are still going to be able to get good marks. But what that has done as an unintended consequence is that now you are expected to memorize things exactly from the textbook and reproduce it to get more marks. Whereas the high-performing countries ask questions which are basis the same content, but the types of questions they ask check whether you've understood the concept or not, right? And in some ways, like learning with understanding or conceptual clarity is actually a lesser cognitive load than memorizing, right? What do you remember from your school? What you memorized or what you understood? And so there is this misconception amongst the question makers that by asking more thoughtful questions, higher order thinking questions, competency-based questions, poor people will do more poorly. But that's actually far from the fact. These students are also very brilliant at market transactions, getting the right change back. So we feel like by changing the types of questions that get asked in board exams, you're shifting the goalpost. And all of this energy, investment that India is pouring into education would be flexing the muscles that would allow us to become a $5 trillion economy, for us to be globally competitive, as opposed to questions that only check for how I've memorized. So, Madhukar, I'm going to ask you some 10 standard questions to check if you are daswi pass
or not.
fail.
Yeah.
Okay, first one, ready for it?
Yeah.
What was the weight of the pituitary gland?
Wow. Don't think so. I don't remember. Maybe like less than a kg. I can just estimate now.
Question number 2. What were the names of Mussolini's parents?
Can't even guess them.
Madhukar, you just failed the board exam.
Board exam for
You're
10th,
no
yeah.
longer 10th pass. But these are real questions that got asked in the exam.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the reason I emphasize is that like the function of the pituitary gland
Yeah.
is more important. You know, learning about mistakes or fascism is sort of more important. But just because the textbook actually talked about the weight of the gland and talked about names of parents, and the question maker thought, let me take a difficult question from the textbook, we're just flexing the wrong muscle
Yes.
in the brain, right? And I think that if we do this, I think it actually will improve both equity and learning outcomes simultaneously. And all of this costs exactly zero.
Yeah.
There's zero marginal cost of changing the types of questions that we ask.
Yeah, and I think, and absolutely right. And I think that's where I think even mobilizing the entire system, of course, you're doing experiments with CBSE, but I think even at a classroom level, at a teacher level, right, exposing them to this idea that, look, there will be certain these factual questions and the way you ask, the way you assess your children is there. But I think if you need to fundamentally shift the way children are learning, are thinking about language, about literacy, about science and everything, you need to shift the goalposts. And it requires knowledge. It doesn't cost you money.
Yes.
I think how you frame the questions, how you define success. So not just, of course, you start with the teacher's classroom, that's a big bet. But if you're able to move the entire system towards a different goalpost, I think we would have done a much better job.
Madhukar, as you know, the leader of your organization, perhaps even your donors, the government, must be asking you in terms of what's the impact of your work, right? So how do you measure this? How do you look at it, even from an evolution perspective? What to continue, what not to? How do you measure what's working, what's not in your organization, in your theory of change? Would love to hear more.
Yeah, no, thanks, Pranav. I think the measurement and impact, especially for organizations that are working at large scale or so-called systems change, is hard to quantify in a limited period in the way at least the donors or the governments or the community wants it, right? At least the established norms are improvement in learning, if that's the sort of North Star and the impact goal. One of the things that we struggle often is convincing our donor community to say, look, you need to fund for 3 to 5 years to really see the change. But I think I'm glad, I think a lot more donors who are supporting us now have been very, very supportive to look at that lens, saying that it's going to take 3 to 5 years for it to deliver and move forward. Of course, as you know, our ecosystem is a big fan of RCTs, right? So I'm sure you guys have done a couple. And we're currently doing one in Andhra, trying to work with JPAL and trying to look at our teacher coaching model. But I think what we feel is more than RCTs, because I think if you look at like the last 10 years and the education RCTs we have done, the success rate of RCTs being scaled or adopted by the government is very minimal. And you know this. And I think
Why are you running salt on my wounds?
And the reason for that is the way the people or the decision makers look at the data coming from such studies is extremely different than the way we as educators or we as people running organizations look at it. So I think what we have now come to believe that what does the government or the systems or people in positions of authority need for us to prove that certain interventions are successful is one, more longitudinal kind of data sets, right? Like showing that there is sustenance, even though initiative was started under one particular government or one particular government leader, the work is leading to sustained results over a period of 3 years, 5 years, right? So I think one of the things that we do is make sure that we have a lot of longitudinal studies happening in the organization that gives us a good. So we recently finished a 3-year study of the work in Maharashtra that showed 10 to 19% improvement in FLN skills, which was a very good sort of a measure for us to see whether we were on the right path or not. and we're doing another 3-year longitudinal study. The second piece of it is process. That's another thing that matters in large-scale reform. That fine, you've achieved this great results, even though you've done it in 2 years or 3 years, but what were those 5 or 6 principles that really led to that change? Because we oftentimes are obsessed about impact and outcome. It's true, but I think we also need to be obsessed about what inputs are leading to that change. So I think we've emphasized a lot on capturing monitoring systems in the organizations are pretty strong now to capture. Literally, we also do capture the number of hours we have spent with a particular, diet or even the teacher mentors to be able to drive change. So if we are able to move granular with the way, what are the processes, how much time it has taken to move a system forward and the different stakeholders, focusing more on processes around inputs. I think that is a second big piece. And the third is just to align with the language of what the world speaks. People understand the language of NAS. People understand the language of ASAR. That's more acceptable. People might less understand the knowledge of competencies and what we connect to, but they understand some common minimum language that is now built up, and that's good over the last 5-7 years with now NEP, Nipun Bharat coming in. Huge emphasis on learning being the big goal for many governments to deliver quality. So I think speaking in that language makes a huge difference. And I think that's the third piece of it that we do. And across the board, I think one thing we've maintained is any impact study has to be external. So we don't do any internal impact studies. Internally, there's huge monitoring structures and systems we've put in place. But across the organization, we have almost 7 external studies, 3 of which have completed, 4 are underway right now. And I think that puts one, it just builds credibility as an org to say that, look, even if we are failing, we need to know where we are failing. And there's an external third party which is telling us, right? But that's critical for us as an org, because it's always hit and miss when you're working with such big systems and big numbers. So I think that's our approach to
No, that's refreshing to hear, being vulnerable to open yourselves up to external evaluations. We have actually benefited a lot from that, not just in terms of knowing what works, what doesn't, but even the evaluators like JPAL coming up with very sound operational insights. For example, when we were working to deploy MindSpark in Rajasthan, we were espousing for personalized learning, which meant at least for one period, 1 device per child. But you had schools in Rajasthan where grades 1 through 5, the average enrollment was 15. And then grades 6 through 8, it would jump to 60 because many primary school kids would come there. And so do I put 60 computers because that's what the entire class would need, but they would be remaining underutilized.
Correct.
And so Professor Karthik and others came up with this idea of, how do you pair students and put them on the same computer, which was antithetical to our idea of personalization, but the sensible thing to do in an under-resourced country. So I think partnerships with external evaluators, and we've had, very good learning moments with ID Insight, with JPAL, with many of them who are there. I also sort of agree with you on the RCTs. Of course, it plays a role, but we have an entire episode of EI Dialogues with Professor Lan Pritchett, who talks about how an RCT is a very thin slice of, under a certain set of conditions, what works, what doesn't, and tell you the full landscape of how that is. But I think each of these ends up having its own benefits of doing that. And finally, I think what we are now seeing is that once you have efficacy of a product, or let's say in your case, a theory, what are some leading indicators that might tell you whether you're on the right path or not? So in our case, while there is evidence that MindSpark works, but the leading indicator is usage. Correct. So if there is 0 usage, there's 0 impact. If there's 60 hours of usage, it's half an SD. And so it's so much easier to talk to the operations team on saying, why is the school not using, rather than saying, why is the school not learning, which you would only know on in hindsight.
Absolutely. And I think the analogy that I keep drawing also, especially for organizations that are working at much more large scale, looking at different aspects in how do you, for us, a core part of our work is how do you make sure that the system in itself is delivering, right? Let it be a district or a small state or a municipal body. And if you're looking at it in that, I think the analogy that I keep drawing is compare a system to an elephant, right? And oftentimes the different nonprofits, and it's just not us, right? I'm sure in any state, any district, there are now many nonprofits trying to work and trying to bring out their own models and interventions. So when you look at the ecosystem of schools, a district or a municipal body as an elephant, everyone is trying to look at it from different lens, right? Like you might say, oh, PAL is important, so there's one lens. So you're looking at the trunk, whereas I'm looking at the tail of, oh, no, but FLN is there. There's someone else saying, oh, but critical thinking. So I think like once you look at different aspects, you might still feel I'm just working with the tail, but I think you're not looking at the overall aspect of the elephant, which is a system in place. And the third parties actually help us do that, especially for organizations to give that lens, boss, like you're working on one of those 5 threads that is moving the system forward. So you might think that there's a causal pathway of the results that we have achieved, but look, there is correlation at the max, or like this is potentially leading to it, and here are the 5 other things that might lead. So I think oftentimes this analogy helps so that it also helps you feel grounded. Otherwise, I think some of these results, even if they're positive or the other way around, it just like either puts you another level, or it's all, I mean, we often also use it as an ego boost in the sector on all of these results. So it's just very grounding in large scale intervention models.
Madhukar, today is June 2025. India at 2047, 100 years of our independence. Yeah. You would have finished your famous 3 decades.
More.
Your son would be an adult.
Yeah.
If I were to ask you to look at the crystal ball, what do you see? What's ahead of us? Like, what's a dream? What's a wish? What's a desire?
I mean, I possibly cannot dream anything different than what I can dream for my own son, right? Like, so my wife Anaga and I, both of us, we're a household of fellowships, right? Both of us were in TFI. And then we have a child who's going to be in the early 20s. He must have finished his graduation by then. And when India is at 100, I think possibly the kind of opportunities that my son is going to have at that time, I truly expect every other child in India will have. And that means the kind of blockages or the gaps we have either at the school readiness, the primary level, the secondary level, college. I think those gaps, I'm hoping we'll have much better clarity on how to bridge those gaps, how to fill those gaps for our children, especially from the children from low-income backgrounds, children from tribal communities and communities that are underserved. And my hope is also, I mean, I can be optimistic to say that none of us exist and truly the government takes up all it's very hopeful and very, very optimistic, but I don't want to sound too optimistic in that lens, but I hope that at least at a basic foundational level, right? Like, we're not asking that every child to be a IIT or an IIM graduate or an IS officer. The idea is that if we have taken the mantle or the responsibility of school readiness and foundational learning, at least by 2047, like, we all need to stop worrying that any child coming from any school in India will not have a grade 3 or a foundational skills.
Yeah.
My hope is in the next 20, 25 years, if we are able to achieve that as a country, I think we would have done a significantly better job at, and of course, I think like the idea of success for our children and what does it mean for, a child to be born in India and to have the kind of opportunities. I think if we are able to redefine that and move beyond just marks, move towards skills, move towards really the potential combination of values for what it means for the child, I think we would have done a good job, and we are 100 as a country.
Nice. I think my hope, wish, desire is that in 2047, India is in the top quartile of PISA because our children are actually understanding and becoming a productive workforce.
Yeah.
That has propelled us to be amongst the top 3 economies of the world. But most importantly, we have good citizens, who have good citizenship of values to do that. And I imagine that by that time, every child's access to computing devices is as ubiquitous as a midday meal scheme that we have today. That has sort of helped propel this towards that. So that's how I see it.
Awesome.
Great. Is there any question that, is there anything you would like to share that I haven't asked you yet?
Nothing for now. I mean, it's just been fascinating to me. I know it's been a complete privilege for me to be on this discussion with you. I know these dialogues have been there for the last many years, but I think having this conversation also opens a lot of, and hearing, of course, multiple sector leaders and people who've been on this space before has been just fascinating. So I think kudos to all the amazing work that EI and the team is doing, not just in this, but I think nationally and globally, and hope we reach our 2047 goal or vision that we have for our children.
But thank you, Madhukar, for coming in today. I really, have watched you from the outside through the newsletters that I receive, and I've been envious of the work that you've done with the government through the pictures. I routinely forwarded to my team saying, hey, what are we doing in the states we work with? But today was a great lesson in sort of systems 101. What a system is, what does the word mean, how does the individual, even if are individually very motivated, tend to operate under system constraints and system pressures. And so while we might just, the naked eye might just see a teacher teaching a student, but there are invisible forces of her block officer, the district officer, the state project director, the principal secretary, the chief minister, budgets. It might even be resources, access, technology, curriculum, so much that sort of either empowers the individual or sort of, puts them to behave the way they do right now. I do understand that while there is tremendous, let's say, immediate gratification in teaching a class, but when divided by 240 million students, how does one think about the needle moving on learning outcomes? And that requires partnership with the government. And that requires deep partnership, where you've said that you just worked with a city, a district for 5 to 10 years before you even ventured out to take on another state. And sometimes returns are disproportional to depth, right? As opposed to a spray and pray approach that even I'm guilty of doing. In this conversation, I really liked about how we spoke on measuring, because sometimes I feel I've drank so much of my own Kool-Aid on how there's one way to improve learning outcomes, that it's only when I talk to others or I talk to third-party evaluators or when I get to see results. It's a forcing function to pivot, to change, to adapt, because at least the ultimate goal has still to be achieved on this. So this conversation was very rich in you unpeeling many layers, and very grateful to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you. Thank you, Pranav. Thank you.